Hey guys, good morning. Coming to you from my junky bonus room this morning. We're going to review the content of time period 4 today. And again, this PowerPoint is in Google Classroom for you guys. We've now reviewed the content of time period 1 and 2, and now we are on to time period 4. Now, because of the changes in the test, remember that the DBQ will come from time periods 3 through 7. So this is a really important area of content to make sure that you are familiar with. I do want to remind you guys to be checking the AP Live on YouTube. They have now finished with time periods 8 and 9 and are going back and reviewing. And what they have is they have APUSH teachers from around the country who are lecturing and reviewing. And so that is a great thing to go back and to watch. You don't have to do it live. They're recorded and you can watch them anytime. Again, since College Board picks the test question and they are the ones that are presenting these reviews, chances are the topic of whatever the DBQ is going to be in those review sessions. So I would encourage you to watch them. Okay, so when we talk about time period 4, it starts in 1800 and goes to 1844, and 1800 is significant because of the election of Thomas Jefferson, the Revolution of 1800, and if you remember, it was revolutionary because that's the first time we had somebody from, if you go back to Washington's farewell address where he said, listen, the two things that you shouldn't do is form political parties and don't make entangling foreign alliances. Well, what we see develop is the two-party system, right? And so Jefferson is going to be elected the first time we don't have a Federalist elected. He's going to be a Democratic Republican. And what was revolutionary about that was not the two-party system, but that a new political party can come in, take power, take that leadership role as president, and that be peaceful and not be done under bloody circumstances. So that was revolutionary about 1800. Okay. All right. So if we look at the presidency of Jefferson here, like I said, it's the end of the Federalist decade. He practiced Jeffersonian democracy. He wanted the nation to be agricultural in nature. Let me see if I can change this. This is kind of weird the way I've got this. So let me see if I can, yeah, there we go. Maybe that's a little bit better. I'm not good at technology here. Anyway, envision the nation as being agricultural in nature with lots of small farms. Remember, he was the opposite of Hamilton, who was the industrial guy. He was also in favor of states' rights, worried about, remember, he's the one that gets the Bill of Rights added into the Constitution. He helped write the Virginia resolutions concerning states' rights. He was a strict interpretationist of the Constitution rather than loose. Very much opposed to the Alien and Sedition Acts that were Federalist acts. All right, however, if you remember during the school year, we talked about how there were kind of two sides of Jefferson, right? His theological, ideological side, and then the practical side. And the practical Jefferson had to go against his own beliefs with strict interpretation of the Constitution to make the Louisiana Purchase, which happened in 1803. And then I go back and look at the Lewis and Clark expedition, and that doubled the size of the United States, okay? Also, his intervention in the Barbary pirate situation where he sends out this fledgling navy to go put down the pirates who were extorting money from us. Jefferson was a non-interventionist, but he intervenes there. Also, his Embargo Act to try to keep us out of conflict with Great Britain or with the French is going to come back to haunt him because it actually inspires more industrialization. Okay, remember we talked about John Marshall, really important. He's first ever Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was a Federalist, and remember, Supreme Court justices serve for life. And so even though the Federalists have died out, Marshall lives on for a long time, and any decision that is made under the Marshall Court is going to be in a Federalist nature, meaning more power to the federal government. I would definitely know Marbury versus Madison and McCulloch versus Maryland. Marbury versus Madison is what sets up judicial review. In other words, that the Supreme Court has the authority to declare an act of Congress unconstitutional. They can review that. All right, go back. Remember when we talk about any type of war, all you need to know is causes and effects and any turning points. So the causes of the War of 1812 are going to be British impressments. That's where the British were taking American sailors and impressing them into the service of the British Navy. And also their aid to Native Americans on the frontier. So the effects is going to be further demise of the Federalist Party, a rise in nationalist feelings, and a promotion of industrialization. Also, Andrew Jackson makes his career in that war, Battle of New Orleans, and so he comes onto the scene. Remember the Monroe Doctrine under Monroe's presidency, 1824. Henry Clay was the guy who comes up with the American system. You need to know that phrase. The acronym we use is BIT. He wanted another Bank of the U.S., internal improvements, and a higher tariff. This is the time period, it's called the era of good feelings because technically we only had one political party. However, there were tensions developing, especially when you think about the anti-slavery movement, the sectionalization of the country between North and South over the issue of slavery and the issue of tariffs too. All right, so we get the Missouri Compromise, which is a huge, you need to know that. That's where Missouri wants to come in as a state, and they're going to come in as a slave state. That's going to upset the balance of power. So Maine is created as a free state to maintain that balance, and then that line is drawn where there will be no slavery above the line, except that Missouri is above the line, and we're going to talk about that later. So 1823, 1824 is when Monroe issues the Monroe Doctrine, which means a warning to European nations, don't come over here and colonize, don't interfere. It was only successful because the British Navy was very powerful. Okay, then we move on to Jackson. He's probably the most tested president of all presidents. They like to ask about Jackson. I remember he was the common man, the rise of mass democracy. He worked to eliminate property ownership requirements for voting and for serving in political office. The spoil system, which means, hey, if you help me get into office, I put you into a position. I want my people in those positions in the bureaucracy. He very opposed to people with money, the privileged elite, even though he ended up, he had money, but he didn't grow up that way. The Tariff of Abominations was an issue during his presidency. Remember John Calhoun from South Carolina, who did not agree with the tariff, because remember, the South doesn't like the tariff. They feel like it favors the North and that it hurts the South. Remember, Calhoun said he was going to declare it null and void. South Carolina, he writes the South Carolina Exposition, and that's when Jackson says, I'll go down there, I'll send the military down there, I'll hang you all, you will pay the tariff. The Webster-Hayne debate, all about this. Anyway, it comes to a resolution. They come to a resolution on that, but go back and look at all of that. Also, the bank war, he shuts down the Bank of the U.S., and that leads to the Panic of what year was it? Let me make sure. 1837. Yeah. These are just some political cartoons. Lots of political cartoons with Jackson here. This is about the spoil system. This is the about the tariff issue. And again, this is, I'd have to, oh, about the bank, the downfall of the bank. Okay, also big with Jackson was his Indian policies, forced removal of the Native Americans. Remember, must know the case of Worcester versus Georgia, where the Supreme Court said, listen, the Cherokee are right, you can't take their land away from them. And Jackson said, Marshall's made his decision, now let him enforce it. In other words, I'm going to do what I want to. Now, the Trail of Tears didn't happen under Jackson, but it did happen as a result of Jackson's policies. Okay, cotton reigned supreme in the South, and as a result, you had textile manufacturing in England, and so England and the South are very much tied to one another because the raw cotton is sent there for textile manufacturing. Let's see. You also had a transportation revolution with new canals like the Erie Canal, the laying of railroads, opening up of the West to trade and settlement. All right, let's see. When it comes to women, and listen, remember that term antebellum America means right before the Civil War, this 20, 30-year period before the Civil War, okay? 1848, which ends time period 4, significant for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's when the Seneca Falls Convention happens, which is the first ever women's rights convention ever held, and at Seneca Falls because that's where it was, Seneca Falls in New York, okay? Remember this idea of the cult of domesticity, this idea of the Republican motherhood. Go back and look at all of that. You did have the Lowell Factory Girls, where you had you're starting to see young unmarried girls starting to work in these textile mills, okay? Women were reformers during this time period, but typically those women came from the middle class. They were anti-slavery, they were abolitionists, they were in favor of prohibition or the temperance movement. Remember, Dorothea Dix was who wanted to reform the way that the mentally ill were treated. And she got those reform movements up and running. Now, the abolitionist movement, the temperance movement, all of those were spurred by the Second Great Awakening. Go back and look at that. Remember, I would be able to connect First and Second Great Awakening, what was similar about them, what are the causes, what are the effects. Second Great Awakening, led by Charles Finney, begins in the Burned Over district of New York, called Burned Over because there was so much preaching that went on there. And out of that, you get things like the American Colonization Society, one of the leaders of the abolitionist movement, William Lloyd Garrison, who was a newspaper publisher, published a newspaper called The Liberator. Look at Frederick Douglass, Sarah Grimke, all of these people that were leaders in those movements. Now, another movement that comes out of the Second Great Awakening is this utopian movements, transcendentalism. Go back and look at that. Thoreau and Emerson, really important. I'm speeding up here because I'm about to run out of time. But definitely go back and look at those utopian societies. Reforms in education were part of that as well. And art became like lots of landscape, nature art that comes out of the Hudson River School of Artists there. Okay, last but not least in time period 4 is the Mexican-American War, but we'll talk about that in time period 5 because time period 5 goes back to 1844 and we really focus on manifest destiny and how that plays out throughout the time period and then leads to the Mexican-American War. All right, hope this was helpful. Hope you have a great day and we'll talk to you later. Bye.